A woman believed her cold neighbor hated her, till an avalanche forced them together. And the man who never looked at her held her as if losing her was his greatest fear. Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us what city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. The building was old, narrow, and always colder than it should be. Its hallways held drafts that crept in under the doors, and the lights flickered faintly whenever the wind outside grew too strong. At the very end of the third floor, two doors faced each other like two stubborn people, unwilling to step aside apartment 302 and 303, hers and his. Emma always arrived late, the kind of late that carried exhaustion in every step, in every soft exhale. She worked at the clinic across town, spent her nights tending to people who needed too much and days recovering from giving too much. She climbed the stairs with a tote bag over one shoulder, grocery bags in the other hand, and a loose strand of hair that always escaped her ponytail halfway through her shift. She smiled at everyone, a tired, kind, automatic smile. Everyone except him. Lucas was the opposite of her in every possible way. He left early, always before sunrise, wearing trekking boots that thumped heavily down the hallway and a dark jacket zipped up to the throat. His backpack looked too professional for casual hikes, and his steps were too quiet for someone the building called cold. But that was the reputation he had earned, willingly or not, the quiet man who came and went like the winter wind. He nodded at neighbors, never lingered, and never seemed bothered by the distance he'd kept from everyone. To Emma, that distance felt personal. She heard his boots every morning, the rhythmic steps echoing through the thin walls between their apartments. There he goes again, she would mutter under her breath, slipping a pillow over her ears. Who walks like they're stomping through a forest at 5 a.m. And yet when she rushed to the elevator one morning, late as always, arms full of files and a half-eaten banana between her teeth, he held the door for her without a word, not a smile, not a comment, just his hand pressed against the metal frame. "Thanks," she mumbled, stepping inside, avoiding eye contact. He only nodded, silent as usual. It irritated her more than rudeness would have. Another day her grocery bag tore open at the worst possible moment, right in front of his door. Apples rolled across the hallway. A can of soup hit her shoe, and she let out a sigh of pure defeat. Lucas stepped out at the same time, keys in hand. Without hesitation, he crouched, gathering the apples silently, placed them back into her arms with a simple, careful, the bag splitting. No smile, no softness. It's just that same calm, unreadable tone. She interpreted it instantly as annoyance. "Right?" she said, almost scoffing. "Thanks." He blinked, confused for a second, as if expecting a different reaction, but didn't say anything. He just unlocked his door and stepped inside, leaving her alone in the hallway with her half-torn bag and a storm of assumptions in her chest. They weren't strangers. Not exactly. They knew each other's names. Zima had seen the mail slip under his door more than once, and Lucas often found packages delivered to hers by mistake. They said hi when necessary, exchanged awkward nods when leaving the building at the same time. Two neighbors orbiting the same small hallway, sharing air but never warmth. An invisible wall stood between them, built from misread expressions, unanswered questions, and that strange feeling of knowing someone only by the sound of their boots on the floor. One evening, while Emma was checking her mailbox, Mrs. Ortega from 305 walked in carrying a stack of flyers. "Winter festival trip next Saturday," she announced to anyone who would listen. "Bus leaves early morning. Snow Ridge Trail, hot chocolate, music. Fresh air will do wonders for you city people. Fresh air." That was all Emma needed to hear. "I'm in," she said immediately. She didn't care where the bus was going. She needed a break from fluorescent lights and hospital beeps and the pressure behind her eyes. "Oh, perfect." Miss Ortega beamed. "Lucas, dear, you're joining too, right? Isn't that the area you always visit?" Emma froze. Lucas, who had just entered the lobby with his backpack slung over one shoulder, paused at the sound of his name. "I go there often," he admitted. "Didn't know there was a trip." "There is now," Mrs. Ortega said, "and you two should go together. It'll be fun." Fun, Emma doubted it. She didn't back out, and neither did he. The following Saturday, she boarded the van at dawn, expecting a quiet ride, maybe a nap, maybe a chance to stare out at pine trees and pretend life was simpler than it was. She sat near the window, tightening the scarf around her neck, her breath still foggy from the cold outside. Then the last passenger climbed aboard. Heavy boots, familiar steps. Her chest tightened even before she turned. Lucas stood there, scanning the seats. Only one spot remained, the empty seat beside her. His eyes met hers with the exact same expression she felt on her own face. Is this really happening? He hesitated for half a second, then nodded once, polite but uneasy. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," she replied, equally stiff. He took the seat, careful not to brush against her, shoulders rigid, gaze fixed forward. The van started moving. Snow-covered roads stretched ahead. Two neighbors who barely spoke sat side by side, trapped in the same narrow space, sharing the same cold morning breath. Neither of them knew that before the day ended, they would be trapped again, but this time not in a van, not in silence, not in awkwardness. This time they would be trapped in a storm that neither of them was ready for, and the distance they'd built for months would collapse under the weight of the mountain. The bus climbed the narrow road as if it were scaling the spine of the mountain itself. The sky was still gray, and small flakes of snow tapped gently against the windows, making a soft, almost hypnotic sound. Ma had taken a window seat the moment she stepped inside, hugging her coat to her chest as if she could protect a little pocket of silence just for herself. After weeks of endless shifts, she needed that quiet any scrap of it. But the bus door opened one last time, and the boots she would recognize anywhere stepped onto the first stair. Lucas, he paused in the aisle, scanning the rows of occupied seats. Only one spot remained next to her, and when his eyes met hers, neither of them managed to hide the exact same thought. Of course, he gave a short nod, a silent request for permission, sat beside her, posture rigid, careful not to brush against her. "Morning," he said, polite but distant. "Morning," she replied, staring out the window. The silence between them was louder than the engine. Emma tried to ignore his presence, but she couldn't help noticing what he was doing. Lucas pulled out his phone and opened the regional map, then switched to the weather forecast, jumping between screens with meticulous, almost obsessive focus. She frowned. "You come here often, right?" she asked without turning her head. He looked up briefly. "I do." She let out a short hum as if that explained everything. What Emma didn't notice was that while she watched the scenery, Lucas watched her from the corner of his eye. Her face was paler than usual, exhaustion shading softly beneath her eyes. He noticed the way she breathed slowly, trying to relax. He saw her fingers interlaced on her lap, gripping her coat so she wouldn't tremble. He opened his mouth to ask if she was all right, but closed it before the words escaped. It wasn't the kind of thing she'd want to hear from him, right? The road ended in a snow-covered mountain village with wooden houses, frozen signposts, and tourists taking photos of a view straight out of a postcard. The air was sharp, almost burning against the skin. Emma stepped off the bus with a breath of wonder, looking around as if she had walked into a different world.
B.
She adjusted her beanie, lifted her chin, and tried to look as if she belonged there, though she was clearly enchanted. Lucas, on the other hand, seemed born for it. He moved with certainty through the snow, stepping where he knew the ground would hold. The freezing wind hit his face, but he barely reacted. It was as if the mountain recognized him. The group gathered for a short hike to a viewpoint. The guide, a cheerful man with a beard already frosting at the tips, walked ahead explaining the route. "The trail is easy, but stay alert. This area can have small avalanches, especially when the weather shifts suddenly." Emma rolled her eyes subtly. The guide spoke with a seriousness she found a bit dramatic. But when she looked to her left, Lucas was absorbing every detail like it was life or death. She huffed under her breath. Exadrado. Yet somewhere deep inside, knowing he was there, made her feel strangely safe. The first signs came quietly. A stronger gust of wind, snow thickening, the sky darkening fast, turning into a heavy sheet of steel. Lucas noticed before anyone else. "We should head back," he said to the guide, firm. Now, the guide hesitated, glanced at the sky, and nodded. "All right, folks, we're turning around." The group began to retrace their steps, but part of the return path crossed a sloping ridge where snow piled easily. Emma felt the snow softening under her boots, giving way with each step, but she kept her posture steady. Lucas walked close behind her, alert to every sound, every shift in the mountain. Then came the first warning, a deep, distant rumble, like thunder buried underground. Lucas snapped his head toward the noise. "Down," he shouted. "Everybody get down." But the warning came too late. Emma felt the ground vibrate under her feet. The snow sank. She slipped, tried to grab a branch, but fell to her knees, the cold swallowing her legs. "Emma." Lucas ran back toward her. The world began to collapse. The mountain roared in a deafening wave. It was fast, brutal. A white wall broke loose from above and came crashing down. People screamed. The guide shouted directions that vanished in the noise. Lucas reached her just in time, grabbed her hand, pulled her hard against his chest. "Hold on to me," he yelled. The avalanche struck. It swept the trail away, dragging them off the path toward a lower area where trees and rocks slowed the impact. They tumbled, rolled, hit branches, and snow-packed ground until they slid into a natural hollow formed between stones and fallen logs. For a moment, everything was too quiet. Emma coughed, fighting to clear snow from her face. She was half buried, but alive. Lucas appeared beside her, covered in snow, breath harsh. "You okay?" he asked urgently, scanning her rapidly from head to toe. She only nodded, still stunned. Behind them, through the cluster of trees, she saw part of an old roof-fan, abandoned maintenance cabin, nearly swallowed by snow. Lucas wiped melting flakes from his eyelashes and assessed their surroundings. "We're heading there," he said. "We stay out here, we freeze." And that was how the mountain dragged two neighbors who could unshare an elevator without tension into the same fate. A forgotten shelter buried in the snow, where the cold would be only the first problem between them. Snow still fell heavily around them, fine as dust and sharp as needles. Lucas leaned over Emma right away, brushing the packed snow off her face with his bare hands. "Ah!" Every movement was firm, fast, almost desperate. "Emma, look at me," he said, his voice rough from effort. "Can you hear me?" She blinked several times until her vision finally focused. His face was close, so close she could see tiny crystals clinging to his dark lashes. And for the first time since she'd known him, she didn't hide anything. Not the panic tightening her chest, not the shaky breath she couldn't control. She tried to say, but her voice cracked. "I'm scared." She would never have admitted that to him in the hallway of their building. Never. Lucas nodded almost imperceptibly. But something in his eyes softened, something she had never seen before. "I know," he said, "but I'm here. Stay with me." He glanced around quickly. The trail had vanished. So had the rest of their group. The silence felt too absolute, swallowing everything, even hope. Emma pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, but the screen flickered with only a single weak signal bar that came and went. "No service," she whispered. "It won't work here," Lucas said. "We need to move. If we stay in this pit, we freeze." He slid a hand behind her back to help her up, but the moment she put weight on her leg, a sharp pain shot up through it. Emma nearly fell back down, clutching his arm. "What is it?" Lucas asked immediately, analyzing her posture. "My ankle." "Her knee? I don't know." "It hurts." He exhaled, low and tense. Not annoyed, but worried. Then he slipped her arm around his neck without hesitation, pulling her close enough to feel what little warmth came from her body. "Lean on me," he said. "I'll get you there." Emma tried to protest, but he didn't give her the chance. His hands adjusted around her, steady and strong, guiding her. Lifting most of her weight while they trudged toward the small wooden structure barely visible through the trees. Each step crunched deep into the snow. Each breath made a cloud of white between them. When they reached the cabin, the door was frozen shut, covered in ice. Lucas pressed his shoulder against it and shoved until the lock finally gave way with a loud crack. "Stay behind me," he said as he stepped inside first. The cabin was dark, cold, and smelled of damp wood, but it was standing. In one corner sat an old bunk bed. In another, a rusted wood-burning stove. A few boxes sat stacked beneath a layer of dust. "Better than nothing," Lucas muttered, testing the wall with his hand. "But don't sit near the window. The wind gets through." Emma lowered herself to the floor where he indicated. trying to hold herself together as the pain throbbed through her leg. Lucas knelt in front of her again, pulling off his gloves. "Let me see," he said. "It's not much." "Probably just a light sprain," she tried to say, as if minimizing it would make it disappear. He raised an eyebrow. "Hey, roll up your thermal pants." She hesitated, cheeks warming. But she obeyed. He slid warm hands along her knee with a delicacy that didn't match the stiff, distant man she thought he was. His fingers pressed with firm but gentle precision. And the closeness, the touch. It made her hold her breath, and not only because of the pain. "Does it hurt here?" he asked, pressing the side of her knee. "A little," she whispered. "And here?" She winced. "Yes." Lucas lifted his gaze. For a heartbeat, they were locked there in a silence that felt different, charged with something new, something that had never existed in the hallway of their building. "It's not serious," he said softly, "but it'll swell. Shouldn't walk on it." "I don't want to be a burden," she murmured. He let out a dry, breathy laugh, the closest thing she'd heard to humor from him. "You always do that." She blinked. "Do what?" "Pretend you're fine? Even when you trip in the hallway and blame the rug? You think I don't notice?" Emma froze. Her heart thudded painfully. She had never imagined he noticed anything about her. Lucas stood and moved toward the boxes, rummaging until he found 2 emergency blankets and a small pile of dry wood. "Good," he said, carrying everything to the stove. "We have a chance." He struck a match, lit the bundle of sticks, and fed the flames until they glowed faintly, casting flickers of warm orange across the wooden walls. The cabin was still cold, but something inside it began to pulse back to life. Emma extended her hands toward the tiny fire, feeling the first real warmth since the avalanche. Lucas returned to her side, more human now than she had ever seen him. "Listen," he said, kneeling again. "It's going to get much colder when night falls. To keep us from going hypothermic, we're going to need to share body heat." Emma swallowed hard. "Share heat," she repeated, unsure where to look. "Yes," he said calmly. "We'll sit close. It's the blankets." Then, after a pause, he lifted his eyes, fixing them gently on hers. "If you feel uncomfortable at any moment, I'll stop. Immediately. But the cold." He glanced around at the cracked walls, the frost creeping across the window. "The cold won't have mercy on us." A silence settled between them, not the awkward silence of their apartment hallway, a new one, warmer, heavier, full of something melting slowly between them. It settled over the mountain like a quiet weight. Inside the cabin, the weak fire crackled in the old wood stove, throwing unsteady light across the walls. Emma and Lucas sat on the floor with their backs against the wooden wall, the cold seeping through every gap the blanket didn't cover. Lucas pulled the blanket a little higher and wrapped it around both of them. The gesture was simple, but the closeness woke something in Emma she wasn't prepared to feel. His body heat spread slowly, steady and grounding, and she could hear his breathing beside her, firm, controlled, almost rhythmic. For a long time they stayed like that, sharing what little warmth the fire offered, until Emma finally broke the silence. "Why are you so quiet in the building?" she asked softly. "Why do you barely respond when I try to talk to you?" Lucas took longer than usual to answer. "'Cause I get nervous," he admitted. "I don't talk easily. I'm afraid I'll say too much, or bother you." Emma lifted her eyes, surprised. He looked far more vulnerable than any version of him she had imagined. He continued, staring at the fire. "One night, I heard you crying in the elevator. It was late. I was in the hallway. I stood there, trying to decide if I should knock on your door." She swallowed slowly. "Why didn't you?" "Because I didn't think you'd want me to know. You always look so strong. I didn't want to cross the line." Emma let out a weak, tired laugh. "I'm strong because I have to be," she said. "My family is far away. Work drains me. And it feels like I spend my life taking care of everyone, and almost no one ever sees me." Lucas turned his face toward her. "I see you." The words sank into her like something she had never expected. "I see you when you come home exhausted," he continued. "I see when you force a smile at the neighbors. I see how you pause at your door for a moment, taking a breath before you go inside. You think no one notices. But I notice." Emma lowered her gaze, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. There was something different between them now, something that no longer felt like distance. "I thought I hated you," she confessed. I think it was fear. Fear of you seeing things in me that I don't want to admit. Lucas drew in a slow breath. I always thought you were strong, but the way you kept me at a distance also hurt. I just didn't know how to get past it. She trembled, not only from the cold. The involuntary shiver made Lucas pull her slightly closer. Come here, he murmured. Her head rested against his chest, and he adjusted the blanket around both of them. His arm wrapped around her back, and his hand began tracing slow, unconscious movements along her spine. The touch was warm, protective, instinctive. After a while, Lucas spoke again, his voice vibrating in his chest beneath her cheek. I've thought about knocking on your door so many times. No reason. Just to see you. Emma lifted her face slowly, and she whispered. Sometimes I pressed my ear to your door when I heard your footsteps, wondering what it would be like to actually know you. His breath faltered, uneven for a moment. He leaned in, closing the distance between them. Their foreheads touched. The fire crackled softly. The air felt warmer than before. Emma, he murmured, asking permission with his eyes. She answered with her own small movement, a subtle lean, a breath that bridged the space between them. The kiss came slowly, warm, careful, full of restraint and a deep, quiet relief, as if both of them had been waiting far too long. Lucas held her by the waist, steady and gentle. Emma gripped his jacket, feeling his heat seep into her, as though both of them were discovering something fragile and unexpected. When the kiss finally broke, they stayed close, sharing the same warm, unsteady breath. The night stretched on, and the fire dimmed. They settled under the blankets, wrapped in each other, relying on the closeness to keep the cold at bay. It was necessary for survival in the frozen cabin. But the way his arms tightened around her, and the way she instinctively nestled closer, revealed something deeper. Something that no longer felt like simple necessity. The morning rose gray over the mountain, slipping through the cracks of the cabin as a faint, hesitant thread of light. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the silence inside was so deep that even the wind outside sounded distant. Emma woke slowly. The first thing she felt was warmth. The second was a firm arm around her waist. She opened her eyes and found Lucas's face only inches from hers, still asleep, finally free of the rigid expression he always wore in their building. No guarded posture. No cold mask. Just calm, almost young, almost vulnerable. For a moment, she simply watched him. The way his breath warmed the chilled air, the unconscious way his fingers still held onto her clothes, as if his body refused to let her drift away. When he awoke, his eyes adjusted gradually, and as he realized he was still holding her, he didn't pull back, just breathed in, as if this closeness felt right. Morning, he said, voice low and rough with sleep. Morning, she replied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. The atmosphere was warm, but there was a weight under it, a quiet fear neither of them named. After a gentle stretch of silence, Emma asked, when we go back to the building, what happens then? Lucas paused only briefly, but it was enough to make her chest tighten. I'm not pretending nothing happened, he said. I'm not going back to being the guy who barely looks at you in the hallway. Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I was scared of that, she admitted, that you'd wake up and think this was all just because we were freezing. Lucas brushed his fingers against her cheek, soft, steady. It wasn't. Before she could answer, he stiffened slightly. Do you hear that? She held her breath, listening. A distant thump. Faint rhythmic, decopter blades, or voices carried by the wind. Lucas rose carefully, avoiding her injured leg, and moved to the door. He cracked it open and looked out through the trees. There's movement on the slope, he said. People. They're searching. Emma's heart leaped. Lucas grabbed his jacket, the dark one with bright accents, and stepped just outside the cabin. He lifted it high, waving it in wide motions until someone below signaled back. When he returned, he knelt in front of her and took her hands between his. Before they get here, said, voice steady but urgent. What happened between us? What we said? What we felt? It doesn't stay buried in the snow. I'm not walking away from this. Emma squeezed his hands tightly. Good, she said, a small smile tugging her lips. Because if you try to run from me when we get back, I'll knock on your door until you open. A rare, genuine laugh escaped him, soft, warm, and he leaned forward, touching his forehead to hers in a brief, intimate moment that felt heavier than any words. Footsteps and shouts approached the cabin. "We've got movement. Over here. Anyone inside?" The door swung open as two rescuers entered with lanterns and gear, their faces flushed from the cold. "Found you," one said with relief. "Can you both walk?" Lucas helped Emma stand. One rescuer knelt to examine her knee and quickly secured a supportive brace around it. "We'll guide you up to the helicopter," he said. "Take it slowly." Lucas positioned himself at her side and didn't let go of her hand, not even when the rescuers offered assistance, not even as they stepped into the snow-covered trail. And the glances exchanged between the rescuers made it clear they understood these Warren-eyed as two strangers who happened to survive together. As they began the ascent toward safety, Emma's hand remained tightly wrapped in his. Every step made it clearer that whatever had grown between them in the cold would not disappear once they returned to the world beyond the mountain. A few days later, the city seemed louder than before, as if the world had moved on while Emma still carried the mountain inside her. The hallway of the building looked exactly the same. White walls, cold lights, perfectly aligned doors, yet nothing about it felt the same. She walked slowly, a slight limp in her step, supported by crutches and with her knee still wrapped. Each sound echoed differently now, as if the corridor held memories only she and Lucas understood. When she reached her apartment door, she found dozens of sticky notes taped to it. "Get well soon, we were worried. If you need groceries, call me. Hope you're okay." Emma smiled, touched, and stepped inside. But the silence hit her differently than before. It was a silence that felt empty, like something was missing, or someone, Lucas. She leaned the crutches on the wall and stood there for a few seconds, staring at his door through the peephole. She thought about knocking. She thought about waiting. She thought too much. Then came the sound. 3 soft knocks at her door. Her heart jumped. She opened it, and there he was. No snow in his hair. No heavy mountain gear. Just Lucas clean, in a simple shirt and jeans, hands fidgeting at his sides, eyes still intense, and clearly nervous, much more nervous than he had been in the cabin. "Hi," he said, voice low. "Hi," she answered. He brushed a hand through his hair, took a long, steadying breath. "I've been rehearsing what I wanted to say," he admitted. "But the more I practiced, the worse it sounded." Emma bit her lip, trying not to smile, then try saying it without rehearsing. He gave a small, embarrassed laugh. Then his expression softened into something serious. "I don't want what happened in that mountain cabin to be just a memory of a bad night," he said. "I don't want us to go back to before." Emma crossed her arms slowly. "So you're planning to hide behind that door again?" she teased gently. He stepped closer. The hallway suddenly felt smaller. "No," he said quietly, "because the safest place I've ever felt wasn't that cabin." He hesitated, gathered courage. "It was you, in my arms." The words hit her like warmth breaking through cold air. She stepped back, giving him space to enter. "Do you want to come in?" He stepped inside. The door closed behind him, sealing out the echo of the hallway. Her apartment was quiet, but not the lonely quiet from before. There was a soft tension in the air, the kind that felt intimate, fragile, real. They sat on the couch. For the first time, they talked without walls, without snow, without fear. They talked about the building, about their routines, about seeing each other in the elevator, in the hallway, passing each other quickly, about small habits that had once felt like distance and now felt like missed chances. Lucas rubbed his palms together, a nervous habit she had never noticed before. "I don't want to be just the neighbor you greet because you have to," he said. Emma moved a little closer. "Don't be." He lifted his eyes to hers. The look he gave her was the same one from the cabin, intense, vulnerable, but now free of urgency.
Out.
He leaned in slowly, the same way he had done during the storm, close enough for the air between them to grow warm, asking permission with his eyes. Emma leaned in too, answering without words. The kiss came soft, steady, warm, not the desperate kiss of survival, but one made entirely of choice. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his and smiled. A few days later, early in the morning, the once cold and silent hallway held a new scene. Lucas stepped out with his hiking boots on. Emma stepped out too, coffee in hand. But unlike before, they didn't walk past each other like strangers. He offered his hand. She intertwined her fingers with his, and together they walked down the hallway. The very hallway that once kept them apart, now transformed into the small path between two homes that had finally become one. So, did you enjoy today's story? If your heart sped up at any moment, if you rooted for Emma and Lucas, or imagined yourself in a scene like this, let me know in the comments. Leave your rating from 0 to 10. I really want to hear what you thought. And of course, if you enjoy this mix of romance, survival, and emotional tension, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next stories. Thank you for watching until the end, and see you in the next one.